In the, at the 2012, I believe, Run for Rita, Kristen Tuttle, who was then working at uh, Children's Care Hospital and School, which is what Crippled Children's have become, uh, talked to me a little bit about they were doing, it was the 60th anniversary coming up the next year, and they were doing a retrospective, and they wanted someone who had had polio and had attended to, do an article for them or, for a story. And she gave me the name of Julie Gem, and I believe I'm saying that correctly, and asked if it would be okay if she contacted me, and I said sure. And she did email me a little while after, but then she said that they already had someone with polio and, would talk another time or something. Well, when it got close to the time that the article needed to be written, it turned out the other person had kind of disappeared on him. I have no idea who it was. And she contacted me and said, kind of last minute, and said, can you do it? And I said, of course. I then, did the story, and it went very well. And it was was a cover on their Reflections magazine, which, long ago I had taken pictures for, in fact. Which led to it being reprinted in the Scotland Journal in my hometown of Scotland, and was seen by a Gene Baker, who had been had known me. He was a lifeguard when I was first swimming in Scotland. It was kind of an interesting story from that. That fall, then, someone had contacted Julie from the March of Dimes, because it was their 75th anniversary, about having maybe someone with polio to speak at their event. And she gave him my name, and of course we connected up. And oddly, it turned out that the person in charge of that had also been a friend of Rita's, which was, I didn't find that out until we already had everything settled. And so I went down there, and Mary Christopherson, my cousin, went down there with me, and it was for this chef's event, which unfortunately I guess I wasn't much for, because I like the dessert, but kind of the rest of it wasn't all that much for me. But I'm not a big foodie of any kind. That next spring, actually right after the first of the year, I happened to be coming back. I'd gone up to Fargo with Mary and her family, the kids, and we'd gone shopping and stuff, and we'd gone to Red Lobster. And I was coming home after dropping them off at Sisseton, and I got to thinking, today I was a shrimp eater, and if way back, I had called the board members shrimp eaters, because they'd gotten shrimp the one time that I knew of. And I got thinking, well, why can't I be? Why couldn't I be on the board of directors? And maybe I could do some good there. Maybe there's some things I could do that others couldn't. And so I thought about it, and when I got home, I emailed Julie, and she said, that would be a great idea. Let me run it past the CEO. In fact, we are just in the process of merging with South Dakota Achieve to form a new organization, LifeScape. And so I went down there and toured in April of that year. Mary again went with me. And it was just an amazing experience going and touring the place and seeing how much had changed and how much had not changed. At the end of the tour, we talked to Ann McFarland, who was the CEO at the time, and talked about it. And she said, I think that, we would like to offer you a position on the board, but we have to have a meeting and confirm it and stuff, which they did in May. So I went to my first board meeting that June, which also was shortly after SDSU had forced me into retirement. And the experience of being on the board there was just amazing to me. And to come back and see things from the other perspective was just unbelievable. And I really consider it a gift. And a number of things kind of grew out of that. Right at the time, that next spring, in the 2000 would have been, I'd think 15 by then, 2015, we were uh, I was at a, it may have been the year later, I was at a Lifescape social in Pierre, and it happened to hit at the same time as the anti-vaxxer movement had become such a thing. And I just kind of, one of the things they talked about at the meeting was something about whether, requiring flu vaccination or vaccination for things. And they said, yeah, we do, except for if they've got a doctor's reason or some, religious problem with it. And I said, I think only a doctor's reason should be good. And I said, and I just said the short, skinny of what happened to me, that I had missed the polio vaccine because I had been ill at the time, and I hadn't been vaccinated, and that's how I ended up with polio and even ended up being there that day. And I said, I just have no patience for that. And sitting right next to me happened to be a medical doctor, an older medical doctor, and he said, that's something you really need to share with people as much as you can. It really is an important thing for people to understand just how important vaccines are. And then later, when we were at the social, one of the other board members came up to me, and we spent some time talking, and she asked me what I did for a living, and she asked if I was a minister or a preacher or something, and I, of course, just laughed, and I can't envision that at all, but I said I was a teacher, and we talked a little bit, and she said, that she was really moved by my story, and that I really needed to share it. Well, I came home the day after that, when I came home, and I started writing my book, Normal for Me. And I had tried and started it a number of times, but this time I really felt motivated to do it. And as I was going, and I never told a single person that I was doing it, nobody, until I had 25 pages under my belt. And then I told a few people, and one of them happened to be Dennis Evenson from Clear Lake, been an attorney and a friend of mine for quite some time. And he had talked about writing a book, so I just thought, what do you think? And he said, well, don't be afraid to put your real feelings into it. And I thought about that, and I took the 25 pages that I had already written and went back through and rewrote them, more showing this is how I felt about things. And then I did manage to, with some help of Jane Rakuzik, my cousin up in, who had been Janie Orth when I was younger, up in Watertown, with her help. Also, my Aunt Silly, Whitrock from California, some with Beth and my sister and Mary as well a little bit. I got the original draft of the book written and somewhat cleaned up, and I showed it to Mary, and she said, well, and I was getting ready to publish it, and she said, you really need to go back through this, and it kind of took me aback for a bit, because, I thought it was pretty decent, and Jane had gone through it, and I thought the English was decent, but, I thought, well, what the heck. So I did listen to her, and I eventually got to a point, and another event happened, and my brother Mike had a stroke, and he hadn't been in good health for quite some time, and he had a stroke. That same weekend, someone from my hometown of Scotland, who I'd kind of reconnected with, one of the Hirsch boys, Fred, who was a runner and everything, had a heart attack and died basically that same weekend. It was at that point that I decided that, I need to do something. I need to get this book finished and out, whether it's perfect or not. So I contracted with an editing place, First Editing, and sent them a sample. They edited it. I then sent the whole book. It cost me a fair amount of money to do that, but I'm glad that I did. The initial book was 137 pages, and so I did then get it printed. And I had thought at the time that, if I could sell maybe 100 copies or so, I would be happy, or at least, I could coerce a number of friends and relatives into buying it. Well, it actually went pretty well, and I had one really good advocate, Dr. Jack Billion from Sioux Falls, and was also on the board with me at Lifescape, and he had said that he wanted more. Every place he looked in the book, he wanted more. Well, then that, starting the next year in 2016, when we were talking about the legislature and trying to get them to, see us in a better light, if you will, or at least know who we were. And I just mentioned at the meeting that, I had thought, but I couldn't afford to send copies of my book to each of the legislatures. And I actually was already started working on possibly getting a copy to the governor, Dennis Daugaard, and getting to meet him and present him with a copy directly. Well, anyway, Jack heard me talking, and then I was talking with Jack about it, and he said, yeah, we need to do that. And then Chip Carlson, who was the president of the board at the time, said, we need to do this. And I said, well, if you wanted to do it, I would cut you a deal on the books. And they said, no, we'll pay full price. And so they ended up, each of them paid for half of the, I got 150 copies for Lifescape and I put a special intro, not intro, but the address for Lifescape and dedicated it a bit to Jack and Chip for having paid for the books and stuff like that. And we did give them to the legislature, went up there to Pierre at the social that year, and I was able to, on my own, get a meeting with the governor to give him a copy of the book, and Chip Carlson went with me, and my sister also was there, and that went quite well. But what was really my real thing with that meeting that day was at the social that night, Billy Sutton, who was a senator from Burke, South Dakota, and he had a rodeo accident and broken his back. And it was somebody that I really had been inspired by and was kind of a hero of mine in many ways. Came to that social specifically to meet me. And that was far more important to me than meeting the governor or anything else. And I sat and talked with Billy for a while and really watched him interact with others and stuff, and I was very impressed by him. And it kind of is something that led to me being such an advocate for Billy later when he decided to run for governor. I knew that he was the right person to do it. I knew that he understood the kind of and understands the kind of difficulties that people can go through. When you're confronted by, with something an event like, getting your back broken in a rodeo or polio or something, it can change you. It does change you. And with many people, it makes you bitter and upset and hating life and stuff. But with some people, it makes you see things differently, makes you understand the pain of others and to feel the pain of others much more deeply, and to realize that you need to, maybe give back. It also does some things like you have to learn how to work around things, how to work with things that you don't necessarily want to work with, but you don't have a choice. And I really think that leads to someone like Billy being a really superior politician and a superior person in general and a great leader, because he understands that you do need to compromise and that you do need to find a way around things, because sometimes you're not really given a choice, like in my case and in his case. And I really believe that someone like that, it makes you a better person. He has said directly that what happened to him made him a better person. And to grab that and use that to turn it into something great is pretty amazing. partly from that, and then also because of Jack Billion's comments, I wrote the second edition of the book, which contains, I added some to many of the stories. I added some stories. I rearranged it slightly. I added a number of pictures, which I think really does add to the book. And I really do believe that it ended up being a better book. I did run it through editing again, complete the whole book, not just what I had changed. And I do believe that it's a much better book for that. And I also believe that coming back to Lifescape was an important part of that. And getting on the board of directors there has been really a gift to me, to be able to see things from the other perspective and to look at things from the top down instead of the bottom up, which is how I had looked at it when I attended there. So this really has brought me full circle, and I really look forward to what's coming. Another thing too that it has brought me full circle on is I am becoming an advocate for disability rights, for access rights, and I will do everything I can to promote that and to push that. And in the past, I've always been someone who just kind of let it be, and I tried very hard to disappear into the woodwork, to not be seen as anything unique because I was disabled, to not make a fuss because I was disabled. And I've decided that I can't do that anymore, that I owe it to those disabled that may follow me, if I can blaze a proper path, that I owe it to them to make a difference, and I certainly will keep trying.